The government is not your friend.
Public school is making us. This is how the Chinese Communist Party has brainwashed the Western world.
Okay, thanks for being here. Liam, out loud.
Dude, I'm excited.
Yeah. So we've been talking for a little bit off the podcast, and clearly part of the reason why I even wanted you here is that while for the most part in my own personal life, I try not to focus on politics or thinking about how power operates, because quite frankly, it makes me pessimistic and cynical. But I think that people need to hear a broader perspective and find some nuance in the dogma that is perpetuated by both the left and right institutions, because it's something that I went through, and quite frankly, it's what's personally led me to the point where I feel like I don't want to outsource my authority. I don't want to outsource my wisdom, if anything. And part of why I got into my own personal spiritual journey and personal development and have dived into the depths of myself is because I have looked outside and seen how the power operates and power and how systems of authority propagate themselves, not for our well-being and not to actually serve us, but as a means of literally just trying to control people, control the narrative, and uphold itself. And I kind of get that, because that's what a system does. It has to re-perpetuate itself endlessly. That's the way it operates. And for anyone listening, and I know I've already given you guys the intro, but you are an incredible voice in understanding how power operates. And I kind of wanted to get your take. How do you think, for the most part, power is currently operating? And I know that's a broad fucking question, so
yeah,
going so far.
Well, I actually don't think it's operating any different than it ever has. That it's very similar. I mean, it's on a different scale now with technology, and also just globalization and how large these systems have become, that by nature the power that is entrenched in them becomes larger as well. And to your point, when you were talking about not trying to get into politics because it can cause you to become very pessimistic or cynical, and it is true, but I think the way that I look at it is, because when I first started thinking about this kind of stuff, I was very similar. Like, would become very pessimistic, would even get like upset or scared even sometimes. And what I realized was I got to treat these institutions just like you would people. So say, for instance, in your space, if somebody's acting irrationally or abrasive or egotistical or, trying to get power over you, if you are trying to change them, that's often where the frustration and the cynicism and the pessimism can come in. But if you're just trying to understand them and then operating within the bounds of how they are, then everything kind of starts to actually click and life can become a little bit more easy, because you're not getting let down by expectations of what that thing should be.
Right.
And that's where I've been trying to get to with politics, is talking about it on the theory end, like political theory, not just talking about the everyday events that go on, or this politician said this or that politician said that. Is just talking about this is how politicians in general operate.
Okay.
And then, so not even sitting here trying to, like, for instance, I put a breakdown of Murray Rothbard, Anatomy of the State, which is, I did a breakdown of that, which is an essay pretty much on how government operates, like the nature of government.
I got the pleasure of watching that video.
Okay.
It's brilliant.
Amazing. I think I saw your comment on there as well.
Yeah.
And this is where I was getting to, was, talking about, I have no aims. Because that's when you start becoming an activist, is when you're trying to be like, all right, this is the changes that I want to see. So it's like, I don't even want to get rid of government, or I don't want to change it, but just understand it, and then just also try to help people understand it as well. Because I say at one point in that video is we're constantly negotiating with governments on the scope of their power and our freedoms. So if you're negotiating with a party and you don't understand that party's motives or what that party wants, you've already lost the negotiation. So it's like, that's my only goal, is just to sit here and kind of arm people with the knowledge of how those things operate.
That's cool. And it's funny how in a weird way, I I try to stick to what I know. I'm like, that is, in one way, shape, or form, what I'd like to imagine I'm trying to do with people. I feel like I understand the human condition to a point in which I kind of understand the habitual patterns of the ego and our insecurity and our nature to, and our human nature. And I think that in part, if I teach people this, that gives them the power to make their own decisions in their own life, as opposed to, like you said, becoming the activist and going, I know the right way to live life because I've thought about this and I understand the government, for instance. And it is hard because at some point there is going to be the obvious criticism, which is, well, yeah, of course you don't have to be an activist. You're not fighting for your life. You're a white man, right? You don't have to be an activist. Some of us have to be activists. And honestly, I kind of wonder, like, do you have a response for that kind of stuff? Because I'm sure that's come up.
Yeah, so no matter what the situation, no matter what you're fighting for or what cause you are an activist in, whether you think you're oppressed for XYZ reason, whatever it may be, I always look at it and just go, okay, what is more likely? What is an easier solution? To change the entire system to better fit and accommodate you, which may be even true that it's not being fair to you, or to level yourself up to a degree that you can overcome those boundaries.
That felt racist.
Yeah.
I'm just teasing.
No,
yeah,
for sure.
Of course.
But and that is one of those things where, and people would, probably accuse me of things like that here and there. But, and I just look at it and just go, I also think taking on that mentality and internalizing that mentality of, I can't do whatever I need to do because the system is the way that it is, you've already defeated yourself before you've even run out of the gate.
Absolutely.
And I look at it as well as even some of these places where there is undoubtedly unfair discrimination and oppression, or even you look at some places like actually what's going on in Africa right now with cobalt mining and even like the China's highway systems and
Holy smokes, yeah, you see that.
Oh yeah, and how they do all that. It's like, for sure that is unfair, but also as we put this great emphasis on mental health, which is 100% warranted, but what is better for your mental health is looking at a situation and saying there's no chance for me to get out of this, or do you think it's more compassionate to give those people a message that would say, hey, there is a chance for you to overcome these boundaries that are placed upon you, even if those boundaries are unfair?
Yeah,
is at least in that scenario, like, I look at a lot of the rhetoric around these oppression narratives that go around right now, and I just go, how do the people that we're talking about in these bounds not feel anything but hopelessness? And that's like the number one worst thing you can do for them,
is strip people of their hope.
Yeah
And the rhetoric that strips people of the hope is often coming from the people who claim to be activists for that group, and that in and of itself disempowers the individual from actually making the changes necessary to actually change their life. It is true that I find that, let's say in the mindset area, it's like you cannot begin to change your life if you think that everything bad about it is outside of your control.
Exactly.
Right? Because if I fundamentally believe that everything that's truly bad about my life is, well, a system in which I can't possibly begin to grapple with, okay, well, like you said, I've already become defeated before. And I can speak from my own experience, in which I grew up a fuck the system kind of guy. And as such, a lot of what I thought was my internalized unhappiness rather, was that because of the world around me. Really doing the work and digging into myself, now I still see a world that is flawed and traumatized, not unlike myself. I'm in bliss, man. Like, it's like, why? Because I stopped outsourcing my power. I
Yes.
like every single day. It's what is, and this is a really easy microcosm to point to what you were talking about. Is, let's talk about weight issues. Now, of course, everybody has different body types, and we have to respect that. And there's obviously been, media has propagated extremely unhealthy body types, or very specific ones, while alienating other body types. However, in saying that, when it comes to like morbid obesity and these levels, there was the movement of compassionate love. I think it came out of love. I really do believe that. But ultimately what it became was, I will not say anything to that would encourage you or tell you that what is happening with your body is wrong or is destructive because I don't want to hurt your feelings. And in caring for you like that, that's the highest form of care. But really what we're doing is enabling the self-destruction, because at that point, you're not providing alternatives, resources, or a mind frame in which they could leave that. Now, I think the alternative and what true love is when we talk about them, like let's say with morbid obesity, is like, I love you as a human. You fundamentally have just as much value as everyone else. Absolutely. Now, there are certain habits in place in your life, like your diet, your discipline around your health and what you're eating and what you're not eating and how much you're moving, how little you're moving, that is destroying you. It's killing you. It's affecting your gut microbiome, which in turn affects your mental health, which in turn affects your ability to show up today in the world, at your job, and your relationships. This is something you do have control over. Yeah. And I'm going to empower you right here and right now to tell you, you can make decisions in your life. It's not going to happen overnight, but there's practical steps that you can take towards having a healthier body, which in turn will help improve your life, because I love you. And I won't lie to you and tell you that it's the system that just hates your body and the media just hates fat people. And that's what it is. That's the true problem. If that's the true problem, then there's no solution for you.
And this goes perfectly to what I was talking about with the whole, what's easier, to change everybody or to change yourself? Is what's easier here, to change, like, and I'm not even saying, there's a whole nother conversation here about, say, beauty standards. Right. But okay, if you want to feel beautiful and you want the world to reaffirm that you're beautiful, you've got two options, and you can either change the world's perception of beauty or you can change yourself to fit within the world's perception of beauty. And one of those things is infinitely easier. It is infinitely easier to take control of yourself. And like, I say this as a dude that I was once probably about 40, 50 pounds overweight. Like, really? I was just partying like crazy, never worked out, was not a healthy person. And then also, and to your point about mental health as well, we sit there and say that, okay, the best thing we can do for somebody who is obese, is mental health, is to reaffirm that they're beautiful, that they, that they have value and all this kind of stuff, when we know that exercise and proper diet is infinitely better at, like, even like there's even studies on showing that exercise is more beneficial to your mental health than SSRIs and all of this kind of stuff.
I preach it.
So it's like, how do we not send that message? It's two birds with one stone, essentially. It's, you're getting the physical dopamine release of exercise, so that boosts your mental health, and then you're also becoming more healthy to the point that people might look at you a little bit differently. And it's like, I can even say that, I don't feel insecure anymore in my body after losing all that weight, but it was nothing anybody was saying to me that made me feel that way before. Right. It was just, I knew. I knew that I was like, okay, I'm not attractive at this weight to people the way that I could be. Yeah. And then, once I changed that, it was like both from the exercise and then also the affirming nature of feeling like, I fit into everybody's idea of what healthy looks like. Then it's like, all right, things are starting to align.
I think there's a conversation here then around truth and like how people hide truth from themselves, how truth is often hidden through messaging. And I think you talked about this. You had a really brilliant video where you dissected, I think it was 1984, and how information is controlled and used. And for instance, that kind of, I think there's an active effort in media. I don't know if I'm a conspiracy theorist or if I just am a pattern recognition machine who then implies intention after the fact. But all narratives that disempower individuals are propagated. Like, for instance, the beauty standard narrative, while of course there's things that we need to work on in regards to the beauty standard, for the most part, a lot of it is around looking healthy, for the most part. Yeah. At least insofar as I understand it. But the thing that's propagated by media is the beauty standard is evil and don't change anything about yourself. Don't worry. But really what that process has done is outsourced your potential to change your life, forced the enemy onto something that you'll never really truly have power over, and made you kind of a cynic around the state of the world. And so I wanted to dive into that. Like, how do you think the media has been using kind of narratives and construing ways to disempower individuals.
So there's actually two things there's two different things about this that are popping off to me right now. And the first is, about essentially incentive structures. So everything comes down to incentive structures, whether it's media, the medical industrial complex, politics, everything is incentives. So you look at every step of the way. Okay, so you've got the food companies. They have an incentive to give you the lowest quality food because they're the cheapest to produce. And then that also teams up with, once you start consuming that on end in giving, say, the McDonald's of the world and the Wendy's of the world and all this, all your money that could be going to healthy food, then you're becoming unhealthy, and now you're profitable to the medical industry, and you have to take pills. This is why you never go into a doctor's office and they tell you, hey, we need to focus on your diet or exercise or this or that. We've got this pill because that is now profitable to XYZ. And then on the media side, there's the incentive to get people listening, and they have the idea that if they propagate these notions of changing beauty standards, or say putting, there's that famous incident with Peterson where he said the Sports Illustrated model was not beautiful. And I'll go into that in a second, but you look at the Sports Illustrated incentive, it's the incentive to get people watching and talking about it. And they just want to sell copies of their magazine. That's it. That's their only goal, is to increase profits for their shareholders as a corporation. So why are they doing these things? To increase profits. And it gives them a sense of, not only are they profitable for doing that, they're also getting all of this virtue currency for doing so.
It's funny because you say, sorry to interrupt, you say virtue currency, but truly what it is living in a society in which our institutions and the power structures and corporations have no values. Because if you have no ideals or values, all you're doing is consistently motivated by, like you said, profit incentives, which change invariably. So you have no value. There's nothing tangible there. Yeah.
And the other thing is, say, to get onto the beauty standards side, is I look at that and I go, I think everything comes down to, like, I'm a big believer in evolution, like Darwin's theory, right? Like that's how all species have come to be. And what are our primary drivers? Is just reproduction.
We want to fuck and we want to.
Yeah. And so it's like, why are we as men attracted to, a big waist, a big chest? It's like, because those are markers for a healthy sign of a mother, because that child will have good milk production. There's
better
healthy
chance of them having birth. Because if they have wider hips, it's less likely they would die during birth.
Exactly. So I look at it and go, these beauty standards aren't necessarily arbitrarily chosen by these institutions and then forced upon us, or what we get called social constructs a lot. It's just our biology on a cultural level. Yeah. And there's actually, have you ever heard of Brett Weinstein?
Of course, I love Brett Weinstein.
Okay, so evolutionary biologist, and he's got a great book called A Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century.
I love it. The focus on the mismatch hypothesis.
Yes.
I mean, that's...
Oh, so you've read it?
No, but I come from a psych background, and I loved personally evolutionary psychology because I fundamentally believe, in part with my whole spiritual inclinations, I'm like, most of this is just the fact that I think we used to live spiritually inclined because we didn't know a lot. You almost had to lean into the mystery, but in many ways, I think that was healthy for us. But in that same sense, I see it in, like you said, things with beauty standards or even our health or diet. I'm like, of course we all like sugar and fat foods. You didn't get that a lot back then. And when you did, you better remember that where it was, because it was a treat for us. But you put us in a mountain, like in a grocery store, we're not capable of making good decisions anymore. No, not at all. And one of the things that he talked about in that book that completely blew my mind and has changed my thinking since is, we constantly talk about nature versus nurture, and that's what nurture is, essentially the social construct idea, right? And it's a false dichotomy. It's a non-starter, because nurture is nature. If you look at
we evolved to be very social creatures. So if these social norms and these social conditions didn't serve our biology, if they didn't serve our genome, we would have evolved to not be social creatures. We would have done away with society a long time ago. But instead, we're evolving more and more towards that. And that's because humans kind of have that strength in numbers idea that, you know, we're herd creatures.
Yeah.
So it's like, that is indispensable from our nature. And so to me, they're not even separate conversations. It's not, you can't even have a nature versus nurture debate because they're one and the same.
That's cool. It's very reminiscent when my brain lights up and it goes, this is in line with like the Buddhist principle of thought in regards to the mind.
Okay.
For instance, they think that for, like the whole, and for the Zens, I believe, or is it the Taoists? One of these freaking schools of thought anyways, are like, the moment that you think that man is separate from nature, that's his biggest problem, is that we keep thinking that's what's arising out of us. This is from the civilized man. It's like, no. You are a product of nature.
Yes.
Therefore, anything that arises from the mind is also a product of nature. And the true spiritual wisdom is finding purposelessness, aka moving through nature, and allowing nature to act through you. One could obviously, of course, we can get into the nuance of this, which is, the human is unique in its ability, in its self-referential ability. Every animal, insofar as we're aware, doesn't have the cognizant ability to be conscious of its own instincts and impulses. Most animals live through their instincts and impulses in a way that's almost peacefully blind. There's a reason we don't call lions evil for eating the babies of other animals. We kind of know that, well, that's just what they do. When we start doing it, it's like, wait a second, that seems evil. Why? Because we do have a unique opportunity in the scale of evolution, which is, if you look at the brain, our neocortex evolved so freaking low. We have the biggest brains, you know, in relation to our body size, and I think that this adaptation, this evolution, part of our evolution, actually, I mean, I'm inclined to believe, is that we have the ability to circumnavigate our impulses. We can overcome our desires, so to speak, to live in more and to imagine new ways of living. But that doesn't remove the human condition of socialization. It's like, yeah, but fundamentally, you can't remove the human from that. You're still a human. Of course, you could argue that the morality of humans has evolved positively to decrease the amount of suffering as our brains grow, because we become more aware of not only ourselves, but of the community of others. And in that growing awareness, we have a facilitation of love and compassion and growth. And that's amazing. But that's still human. It's still, I wouldn't be because there are lines in mystical thought that I'm not in agreement with, that try to like separate the humanity from the human from the spirit. I think they're indivisibly, like, they are interconnected, right? And you cannot take one away from the other.
No, and I'm right there with you. And to your point is, like, I mean, from somebody with a psychology background, you know this as well as anybody, that 95% of our actions that we choose to do on a daily basis are completely subconscious. Like they're just habitual actions. We don't have nearly as much control over ourselves as we think. And that is just our nature. And so all of these things, like you were saying about how we look at certain actions that we do as bad, but when they happen in nature, it's just nature. And I think that's kind of where I want to get to with this understanding of things. Or even, you know, for instance, on, say, something like war. It's like, we can sit here and say that war is bad. I agree that war is bad. I don't want wars to happen. I don't want anybody to go to war and lose their life in war, any of those things. But then you also look at it and you go like, holy shit, this behavior is also very common in chimpanzees, which we're 99.8
We're
or
not
something
that different
like that
from them. We're
percent,
extremely
like,
similar.
same. And so you look at that and then you're like, wow, okay, chimpanzees seem to go to war with one another for fun. Like there was a primatologist on Peterson's podcast that was talking about it, and how that was essentially like mind-blowing to them. There was no reason for the fact that they went and tore each other to shreds. It just seemed like something they wanted to do. And even when there was, say, a chimpanzee that had left one troop and then went to another, that had like no regard. Like when those people came in, they still fucked them up all the same. Like it was just like utter insanity. And so you do look at this, and we look on a nature perspective of kind of survival of the fittest. That's natural selection is going, let's weed out the weakest of these genes. And then it's like, holy shit, okay. And at least if we understand that war is part of our nature, then we can start to actually conceptualize what we do with that and go, okay, now how do we now that we understand that this might just be baked into us, that this might be something we want to do, how do we deal with it? Because if you're just sitting here and saying like wars happen for no reason, it's just all this, then it's like, okay, well, now you don't even know the problem.
Dude, this is very Jungian of you.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're essentially saying it's only when you don't acknowledge that the dark aspects of the human condition as it's expressed throughout the world is separate from yourself that it has true control over you. And that's when it'll become something that you actually act out. Yeah. We can talk about like Nazi Germany, for instance, or World War II, when none of those people imagined that they were evil. They were just, for instance, following orders because they didn't have what I believe you and I have, which is this very aware state of, I know I have evil in me. Yeah. You don't think I have darkness in me? You don't think I have anger and the ability, like the chimps, the ability to be torturous and absolutely malicious? I do. And it's in the awareness and in the light of consciousness in which that stuff no longer drives me because I have the awareness to see it. It's only when we're blinded to that nature of ourselves that we so easily want to throw onto other people and other groups. I'm not evil. That political side is what could ever be evil. I could never be. That's the kind of thinking that leads you to become it.
Honestly, the people that are most likely to have been Nazis in Nazi Germany are the people today that say, I would never have been that. It's the people that understand, holy shit, what caused them to become Nazis and follow the orders and just blindly listen to that authority and do horrendous things on those orders. That's what allowed them to become that way. And there's actually a great book called Ordinary Men by Christopher Browning.
Tell us all about it.
So it breaks down diaries of Nazi police officers.
No shit.
And so what was the biggest and craziest thing for me was realizing that we have this idea that the SS soldiers, which were
committed
the
evil.
worst of the worst of the Nazis.
Yeah.
Like there was different kind of factions within Nazi Germany, and the SS soldiers were like the most passionate Nazis there were. And they were definitely
not just a normal Nazi, but they were the passionate ones.
Yeah. But then they were called general battalions, and what it was when the war first started kicking off, men kind of in that conscription age from like 18 to 30 or whatever.
I think it was like 15, 16. Bro.
Oh, wow. Fuck. Okay. Even younger was they had the option. They said, okay, you can join our army and go to the front lines, or you can join our local police reserves and you can go be part of these police battalions. So they were like, okay, well, I don't want to go fight in a war, a lot of these people. So they're like, I'm going to join the police battalions. But they didn't know that the police battalions were going to be the ones in charge of doing the ghettos and looking after the Jewish ghettos and rounding up the ghettos after. So essentially the military would go through, get these areas under control, occupy these areas. They'd push forward on the front, and then the battalions would come in behind them, and they were the ones doing all the dirty work.
Right.
So they were joining these groups thinking, I'm going to get myself out of the horrors.
I'm just going to be a police officer just fucking around.
Exactly. And then they're the ones that get the orders to go round up the Jews and do these things. And then you also see in these diaries, dude, it's like harrowing. There's points where you hear people, even the commanding officer at one point and a bunch of the people underneath him, there was diaries of him becoming like a raging alcoholic. He was sobbing in his quarters every night, like just like hating himself. He's like, I can't believe I'm fucking doing this. Like, this is so bad. But he was just he was just a cog in this machine, and he was like breaking because of it. And so you see these human aspects where you go like, holy shit, it's almost just coming down to, if I don't do this, it's my family that's going to get tossed into these things.
Which very literally was the way power operated in Nazi Germany.
So, to your point, it's like, if you can understand the human nature of why we would do those things and what can bring us in that step-by-step process that brings us from joining a police force to rounding up a ghetto to all of a sudden then bringing them out to forests to kill them en masse, then you're like, holy shit, okay, I can see this process. And I was actually talking to, so like sometimes I'll talk to my family about this stuff, and my mom will be like, this makes me uncomfortable. I don't want to talk. This is like really dark. And I'm like, yeah, it is. I was like, it is dark, but I was like, the reason I know that I am now more guarded against ever becoming that dark aspect is because I know the first domino.
Yeah.
I know that first domino, and it's easier to say no then than it is after 15 dominoes have fallen.
So for people who are listening, would you break down that process? What is the way in which we end up in a system like that?
Yeah, I think honestly the first one is just deferring to authority, and which is a big thing that you've talked about, where it's this blind trust of the people above me know what's best.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about it like, you know, how when we were growing up as children, we thought all the adults knew everything, right?
I literally did.
Yeah.
I thought every single adult knew the answers of the universe,
Yes.
and why I never stopped asking them questions.
Yeah.
Thank God I kept asking.
Yeah, exactly. And then so it's like, okay, so if you just understand that that's that same, that analogy on, say, a political scale, it's the exact same. We like to think these people that are in these positions of power know, they have this hidden access to knowledge that we don't. And that was like, okay, we need to trust that they know what's best here. It's like, we're just the children, they're the adults in this scenario, but you just need to realize that, yeah, they don't know shit.
Yeah. I really want to, I love your videos. Anyone who's listening, you guys could just watch them and get more value, honestly. But I want to have this conversation. We were talking about it, and I think this is really important. Talking about how we start getting into that situation, and you made a video about 1984, and I'm bringing it up again just because I think you touched on this around like how we become, what is it? Like how we just kind of trust Big Brother, and like, and I was hoping you could break that down a little bit, or kind of speak to how you think, because I know you do. You see a lot of analogous similarity between our current society and that, you know, dystopic world in which Orwell, posited. And I think in part why I like it is because I think a lot of us right now, we look at our culture and we go, look, we've got some problems, but there's no way, in part what we're saying, there's no way we could ever actually get to a dystopia.
Yeah.
And my inclination is, my friend, you already live in that dystopia, you idiot. Like, it's not quite like they imagined. You can say what you want, just don't say it at work.
Yeah.
Just don't say, right? Just don't post it.
Yeah.
Just don't. You're not going to get rounded up. You just might lose your job.
Yeah.
You just might have a whole subsection of the world call you a word that alienates you from the rest of society.
Yes.
You might, I think that we are already in that world, but I was hoping you could kind of dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, I joke. I'm like, welcome to dystopia. Enjoy your stay. It's mandatory. But like, so it's one of those things where, because people don't see our society look the same as, say, 1984, as they envision 1984, where it's this rubble, it's, like, it's such a dark, very bleak. Everything's falling apart. Everybody's wearing the same uniforms, the clothes, their food's being rationed, all of this kind of stuff. I look at it less in the physical sense and more in the psychological sense, where all of the tactics, and this is nothing new. This is back in the church days to modern politics. All of it is, we're ruled with fear and anger, but they're easily controllable emotions. And even again, going back to our nature, I think it's the olive chimps. There's a certain branch that they found and studied where essentially anytime there was an external threat, whether it be nature or birds, they lose their shit. And then what immediately happens is everybody in that group defers authority to the strongest among them.
Strongest guy, yes.
And so they're actually very democratic and like very equal per se on a normal basis. But as soon as fear gets stoked, they all of a sudden hand off authority and they go, "You're the most capable of dealing with this. Tell us what to do." And you see that, I mean, in every scenario. And so I think that's where it's like this constant state of fear that we're thrown into with media. And then you look at media and you go, okay, well, that's the 2 minutes of hate.
Yeah.
We all gather in the public square. They tell us who the enemy of the day is. We all chant at it and say that, like, fuck that guy. We're getting angry at that person. and then we give them authority to deal with that threat. And so I think for sure, yeah, in a psychological sense, we're very much like 1984.
And I think what's important to note too for anyone listening is it's not just one side. It's not just Fox News. CNN does it too. In fact, the whole point, I think what we're trying to touch on is that is how the system or the process operates, irregardless of how they choose to identify themselves. That is the very nature. Is how can I get you to listen to me? Well, I need you to be angry and scared. How can I get you angry and scared? I'm going to create a bunch of narratives around the enemy, whoever they are in the ideological sense, and I will exacerbate our differences and pin you against them, so that you don't have to confront or think about how I'm the one with power over you, not them over you.
Yeah, for sure. And then I think about, say, politics or government in the terms of, like, let's say we're all on on a massive ship, like on a cargo carrier that's very hard to move, but it's heading in a general direction. And what we're doing with politics is sitting there and bickering. Like, let's say our end goal is 100 miles that way, and 50 miles down the line there is a small island, and we're sitting here arguing about who we want in control of the ship and whether we want them to go left around the island or right around the island. But it's like the goal, it's still going to the same place. So what the whole idea, and it's the illusion of choice, is that by deciding whether you go left around the island or right around the island, you have this false sense of control over which direction we're heading in, and it's just not like we're going to the same destination no matter what.
I think that's cool to bring up the false sense of choice, because our world doesn't have that Orwellian, or like you said, I think psychologically our world has a lot of Orwell in it, but I think pragmatically, objectively, it looks a lot more like Huxley's world, the Brave New World. Why? Because you have choice. You can have sex with everybody. You want to do drugs? Go for it. I mean, in fact, I think it's a good policy, but in BC, here's drugs if you need it. But the point is, we don't live in the oppressive objective reality. We live in the reality of pure pleasure, pure hedonism, and that's suggested to be freedom, right? And I think the nuance is actually that's just another way to keep you in control. Because if the famous quote, "Are you not entertained?" In the gladiator arena, because we are in that late stage capitalism, I believe, and we are in that Roman collapse where it's all of these faults are being realized, and the only way that the power is able to maintain itself is I got to keep them entertained, consistently entertained, and of course then I have to have them psychologically weakened. So that's the oppressive nature, that's the Orwell. But with the whole Brave New World kind of like stripping them of the humanity, aka what John represents, John the Savage in the book. If anyone's read it, they're familiar. If not, you should read those two books, Brave New World in 1984. But in it, because he's kind of the symbolic connection to our humanity, to our nature, and nature as as it is expressed without forms of power and control, luring us into their vices. Because again, there is a unique situation here where I go, because you could criticize our conversation a little bit by being like, well, they said that anything that arises is nature. So isn't then these powerful people holding power over us just natural? And I go, sure. But it's also natural for people to not want to deal with it. It's also natural for us to question these authority. And it's also natural for us to fight for what we think is right. And that's maybe in part where war comes from. And I'm not here advocating for war in any means. I'm a huge coward. And I don't know if I'd be willing to go if I got conscripted. I'm a pacifist. But I do think we have to, in a way, battle ideas, at the very least, because how else do humans compete for what nature they think ought to win or hold governance? Well, damn, I don't know. We've been fighting it out. Hopefully, we can do it in a discourse that is productive. But again, like, it's really hard for us, I think, culturally right now to even acknowledge that there is a problem because of that Brave New World aspect, aka because there's so much comfort. Oh my God, you can choose from anything. What do you want? Do you want to be mass entertained on your phone? Do you want to learn a million things on YouTube? Do you want to, there is access to mass entertainment, but inevitably, I think that it ultimately serves the powerful and the elite, or these forms of governance. because firstly, they can actually get online and censor the things that they don't want on there
Yeah.
that actually are threats to their power, and then they can kind of allow anything that they think is just frivolous and superfluous and inevitably just keeps you busy and docile.
Yeah, and there's a great quote where it says it's by Neil Postman. He broke down the differences between Huxley and Orwell, and he's essentially said, in Orwell's in Orwell's 1984, the citizens were controlled with fear and anger. In Brave New World, they were controlled with pleasure and desire. And what Orwell feared were those who would control information. What Huxley feared was those who would give us so much that we were reduced to passivity and egotism. That it was just essentially information overload, and that's definitely where we are.
Passivity and egotism.
Yeah.
Now, if that isn't if that isn't like the number one problem, and I think in an individual's lives, and that really goes on to what we were saying just at the beginning. Passivity in the sense that you think that you don't actually have control over your life.
Yes.
It is so. It's so crazy. It's such a radical notion, yet it's the most simple notion to go. Most things in your life you have control over.
Yes.
Of course, you are dealt hands, and that is something I will never argue. Life is unfair. Fundamentally, there are people who are born into privileged families and who will always have a safety net of finances. There's people who don't get that chance, who live in impoverished countries. However, no matter in which context you find yourself, you always govern the quality of your thoughts, for instance, the decisions you make and how to show up to the world, and in part, I think your mind ends up being the most important thing you can have sovereignty over.
For sure.
Right. And which is why I think what we're trying to get to is a point where individuals can have authority over themselves, where they don't have to outsource their power. And I think we both share that value, which is important. And again, it's weird that I think fundamentally every person agrees. I think everyone hears that and they go, yeah, well, of course, I don't want to outsource my power. But it's just those damn people on that side who want to take away my power. It's these damn we get pulled right back into a narrative of us versus them. Yeah. And again, you could touch to a lot of factors that create that. Media. You could create the U.S. the two-party system. The idea, race ideology around regarding ourselves as different races when fundamentally we're all the human race. That's biologically there actually is there's not a lot of evidence even for race differences. There's a really unique paper that I remember learning about in evolutionary psych that often you can find more genetic variance within a racial group than you do between them. And this is when you're counting statistical averages. The point of that scientific fact is to say on a biological basis, race isn't real. Now, of course, on a phenographic sense, aka on a phenotype sense, aka what do you see? Yeah, of course, race manifests itself in different skin color, height, the things that are noticeable. But objectively, those things are meaningless and worthless, and they don't really, nor should they be propagated. Yet we live in a culture that continues to reinforce these things as fundamentally crucial and important for understanding ourselves. And what does that do? It divides us further. Yes. And it's in that division that we get pulled again into this us versus them, where we can't find the unity and the communion to go, hey, wait a second. I think we actually all, for the most part, want love, connection, security, and safety. For the most part, I don't want people to tell me what I have to do, and I don't want to tell anyone what they have to do. It's just that there is a system of governance and power that continues to pin people against each other, continues to stoke fear and anger so that we become easily, influenced, and then sets us against each other among those minute differences so that they can continue to govern us.
Definitely. Yeah, you nailed that for sure. And I think that is kind of where control comes from a lot. And I don't understand, I can sympathize a lot with, say, these notions of, hey, X group has been treated poorly from the system has been treating this group unfairly for X amount of years, but I don't understand the solution. So I understand the problem and I can really get on board with the problem, but almost always the solution to these problems put forward is to give those same institutions more power.
Ooh.
It's like, oh, okay, the government has been treating black people unfairly compared to white people for 200 years. So what's the best course of action to solve this? Let's give government more money and have them disperse it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, how does that make sense? That like,
It's like they have a really terrible track record. Of
Yeah.
this. You guys are still giving them your trust. And I think there's a naivety, and again, the deferential to authority. It's like,
Yeah.
well, it's this weird thing that I really think that's like a cognitive dissonance. Actively saying, there's systemic racism, systems are evil. And I'm like, yeah, you're touching on something. What's the solution? I need the system to have more power and control over my life as an individual so
Yes.
that it can help me. Huh. Okay.
Yeah.
You believe that?
yeah,
Like,
it doesn't make sense to me. And two is, well, to that point where you see it a lot where people will give certain, like, let's say they want to give political party left or right more control to deal with the fact that they don't like the other party. But then it's like, you do realize that as soon as this party gets in, they now have access to that same power you just gave your people to deal with that.
I don't think I honestly think most individuals, unfortunately, don't think that far along.
It's true.
I believe that the very way that our media has garnered our attention and programmed us to think very, like, every single day.
Mm-hmm.
I don't honestly watch the news at all anymore.
Yeah, I don't either.
I don't have a TV in my home, as you see. I mean, other than a vintage one. But in saying that, I don't interact with the forms of media in which it's presented, because when you do and you start to like have an awareness around it, you recognize every single day is something new.
Yeah.
It's something quite profound. Every day is actually a huge piece of news. The next day, it's a huge movement among the war. The next day, it's a huge medical discovery or a medical threat. And if you live in the realm of media or mainstream media, how could you? I understand. I sympathize. How could you possibly think 5 years ahead?
Yeah.
How could you?
For sure.
How could you?
Yeah.
You're thinking about right now,
Yeah.
because right now it's life or death. And if right now is life or death, right? Again, the fear has gotten to you. It's pretty easy to accept an encroachment of on yourself from
Yes.
from these systems of governance. And I wanted to ask you something about like politicians. I think you've touched on this, but it's like, what are the kind of people that you think that even end up in politics?
Yeah, I think it's people that want to, I mean, if you look at government, it's to govern, it's to control. It's like, so the people that want to put themselves in those positions are people that want to control things. And, you know, historically, whether that's on a social scale or in a personal relationship scale, those people aren't usually working with your interest in mind. So that's definitely something that right off the hop should just have everybody, you know, I don't think every politician is evil, but I think every politician is deserving of ruthless scrutiny. Prove the fact that you're not into this for your own. Don't just sit here. You know, we were talking earlier about a certain politician that, oh, he says nice things, and this is one that I've had with a family
We can
member as
criticize
well.
Trudeau.
Okay. So it's just, I try not to, because I'm like, then people can get the concept.
It's like, for anyone listening, I wanted Bernie to win in 20 whatever. I voted for freaking Trudeau when he first got elected because I was a goof and I was young and I was naive, and I fundamentally agreed with the liberal values of unity, of connection, of seeing beyond race, of equality. That sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
That's the thing about things that sound wonderful. There's always this beautiful thought in the spiritual realm, which is the devil doesn't show up as a red-tailed creature with horns. The devil shows up as the most beautiful thing you've ever seen.
Yeah.
What would be tempting about sin if it appeared in this destructive sense? No. The darkness appears as the most beautiful thing you've ever seen, and that's the temptation, my friend.
Yes. Yeah, no, and that's spot on. And so to sit there and go like, yeah, he's saying everything you want to hear, and like you, I voted for him in 2015.
Yeah, was that? Yeah, it was.
Yeah, and And so, but then you look at it and you go, what has he done? Has, Aboriginal life gotten better since? Has life...
Hasn't done a thing for the Aboriginal community.
Exactly. So it's like all of these groups that he talks about and uses as essentially stands on as a platform for himself. Their life isn't getting better. The heavier he gets, literally, the more they get pushed down. And so I think, that's just the nature of a lot of politicians, especially the ones that want it. There's definitely people that get tossed into politics and kind of by the people's will. And there's others that go into it kind of, just genuinely wanting to be in that position of presiding over others.
Yeah, it's crazy that there was, I don't know if it was Musk or one of the guys from the intellectual dark web was talking about politicians and how it should be. And it was very much like, maybe it was Joe Rogan, where he's like, firstly, the fact that we even have a president, that's a silly system. That's crazy to give one guy that much authority, obviously. But secondly, it's like, how can we not create incentives around becoming a politician?
Yeah.
I don't want the person who has control over me to want to gain any more control over me. I want to incentivize a system in which he wants to, those people want the least amount of control over me.
Yeah.
And how could you do that? Well, firstly, I don't know, a better vetting system. And I'm not sure. I was hoping maybe you would help me, because I think you think about this more, but have you thought of any alternatives to governance? And I don't think we touched on it. Would you break down how you currently see governments as always operating throughout history? Because I watched that video, it was brilliant, but I'd love if you could break it down for us a little bit here today.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
then, do you see any other alternatives? I did give my alternative in the comment, or what?
Yes, I did.
I'll touch on that after.
Yeah, no, I figured. Yeah, because I was actually figuring I'd wait to talk to you about it today here, but. Yeah, I don't know if I see any necessary alternatives, and I do say it in that video, is, government, it just wears different outfits. But the nature is the same. So I don't know if there's any getting around it per se. I think there is certain aspects with, say, for instance, like the American Constitution did a pretty good job at trying to limit, but even look at what happened now is, like, even it's insane to me that, we sit here in America is the world police at the moment, and they're trying to get into every single conflict they possibly can. And it's like, that's as anti-American as it gets. Like, even if you look back to the world wars, World War One, I think Woodrow Wilson.
Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah, he was president then, and he was essentially saying, like, look, we're not going into Europe. We think this whole war that you guys are fighting about imperialism, who has control over what, this and that, it's ridiculous. We're not going to get into this. He was essentially calling for peace, all of this, and it wasn't until they got attacked, same thing with World War II, where they said, that's Europe's war. We're not in this. We're not here to we're just here to manufacture arms.
Yeah. Hey, they are opportunistic capitalists.
Yes.
That's just
exactly. But it's like they were America was founded on anti-imperialist values, and now they're the biggest propagators of it. Like,
you've become the very thing you swore to destroy.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Preach.
But so it's like, the American Constitution did a great job at trying to keep that in check. I think the issue, and to be honest, this is maybe a little bit of a cynical view, is I don't have any answer for keeping money out of politics, but that's definitely the number one. Because now at this point, it's
lobbying powers control the.
Yeah, and it's regulatory capture at this point. It's like all of our institutions are, and I've said this, and this is something I've been talking about, is trying to dispel this notion that we live in a democracy. Like we don't live in a democracy.
People are so. I love that. It's such a beautiful idea.
Yeah.
I go, what? You think that?
Yeah.
Did you have any? Have you seen the bills that were passed? Did you say anything about that? No.
Again, it's comforting to think that you have control.
There it is.
And so, but we don't, and we really live in a corporate aristocracy. It's a small group of corporate elites that run and decide the direction of our nations, and they go by the name of World Economic Forum. But you see this.
Be careful there, conspiracy theorists.
But you see this where it's like, how do we expect there's a great lyric actually in a System of a Down song where he goes, who's going to regulate the regulators? But essentially you look at it, it's like, okay, so these people get into these positions by corporate money. And then once they're in the positions, they're essentially treating them as an application process to go work at the corporations afterwards.
Yes, please break this down for people.
Yeah, so like it doesn't matter what industry. It doesn't matter whether they're in the FDA or whether they're in the DOD, like the defense, or medicine, any of these areas. All of these people, or financial sectors, all of these, there's actually a great scene in The Big Short that breaks it down when the girl's sitting at the pool and she's sitting there. She's like, oh, he's like, what are you doing here? Like, and she's like, oh, I'm here to float my resume around. And he's like, but you regulate these companies. Like, what do you mean? And she's like, oh, yeah, but I don't get paid enough at my current job because government salaries are little. So they're like, I'm putting in the time here to then go, and I'll be given, if I do a good job in this regulatory capacity for this corporation to get them beneficial laws and regulations put in place, then I've got a nice comfy seat on their board of directors when I get out of here. And that's the case. You can go look at this with the Pfizer board of directors.
All used to work for literally the FDA and the regulatory committees.
Yeah.
It's literally, please take the time, just Google it. It's wonderful to see how many of the people who are making rules and regulations around the kind of things regarding our health that's been going on for the past few years ended up or have worked on or have sat on the boards of the very companies that you would hope they would be there to regulate and hold accountable for their decisions.
Yeah.
How can we honestly expect individuals getting millions, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars from a company to then objectively regulate that company?
Exactly.
There's a naive ignorance. I don't want to attack people, but when I see that level of trust in authority, I hope that it really comes from an ignorance of you don't understand how this system operates. And hopefully what we're doing is showing people that the system operates by selling itself back to itself, aka there is no true accountability.
Yes.
Right? And it's funny because then that same system is what holds us extremely accountable in things like taxation and a lot of other things where if we don't, it's the highest, you said this in the video, it's the highest punishment to disobey the government. That's treason.
Yes.
Yet there's no punishment when the government does it.
Yeah.
There's no real punishment even when the corporations do it. The banks lie to you intentionally, knowing that they're being reckless with your money, whatever. They cause a system collapse. What's the punishment? One individual who didn't even necessarily control that whole process gets penalized, and he's in a nice, comfy, cushy prison for 7 years, and then he's out, and then he gets a nice bonus from his buddies. Come on.
Yeah, it's insane. And yeah, talking in that video as well is like the thing with government that separates them from any other institution that I think if people really understood and looked at it through this framework, they'd understand kind of how government operates, is there's two ways of doing business in essentially working with individuals. You can either be cooperative and mutually exchange your productivity, your goods and services. I give you such goods or service, you give me money.
I give you my time.
I go give that to somebody else for another resource. So there's like that free
Barter.
exchange. Yeah, free exchange. And then there's also just coercive dictation over those relationships, which is, okay, anytime you guys do something, I need a piece of that. And that's how government operates, is government doesn't give you anything. And people look at it and they go, well, like government gives you roads, pensions or roads or this or that. And I go, they don't know, like a real transaction would be somebody builds that and then they say, here, you pay me for the access to that. But what happens is they take your money and then they give you a service for it. And that's different on the back end. That's a completely different structure to exchanging resources. Because, for instance, let's say I take $10 for you and it's like, okay, I gave you something back that's of value for $2. And it's like, well, yeah, see, the government gave me something that's valuable for $2. It's like, yeah, but they took 10 from you to do it. And so
You had an analogy. I hope you can. You said government as ma.
sorry.
You used the mafia analogy.
Oh yeah, and it's the same idea as the mafia, where okay, we're going to stoke fear and division within this area. Like say a mafia head comes in and breaks your windows, and it says, "Oh wow, that's really terrible that just happened."
And it was actually the Jews across the street.
Yeah.
That's how the Italians.
It was XYZ group, and if you pay us a certain amount of money, we'll protect this from ever happening again. And then just make sure not to miss your protection payments, because otherwise we can't guarantee that these things aren't going to continue happening. And it's like that's exactly how government operates. Is like, hey, oh yeah, we even look at, say for instance, cops and all of this, and it's like, look, there's a lot of arguments for them, and I'm not necessarily somebody that hops on the defund the police train, but you also look at it and you go, okay, for instance, okay, well, if we didn't have government, who's going to make sure people don't murder each other? And it goes, okay, valid question. Who's going to enforce, certain things to make sure that they don't happen, these bad things? But then I also look at it and I go, do we want the institution that is the most guilty of committing those things for the last 200 years to enforce those rules? Like, governments killed 250 million plus innocent civilians in the 20th century alone.
Wow.
And even you look at America and the Middle East, it's like they've killed over 1 million civilians. Like, you're going to tell me they're the ones to care about civilian life?
And there's no accountability in it. It's funny, you said the whole, like, mafia breaks window. Now, I would never say that an attack on the U.S. soil was an inside an inside attack or an inside job. But what I will say is that it seems like incidents like 9/11 and even our recent thing that happened with everyone being scared of their health, there's an opportunistic power grab that occurs. And every single time that a government sees an opportunity to leverage itself as the protector, it takes it. And not only does it take it, it runs with it. And I think that's what always scares me as an individual, and what makes me a little bit paranoid is because if there was ever a friend in my life who it seemed like every single time that I was going through a hard time was all of a sudden encroaching on my space more and then gaining control over me and influencing me, that's an abusive relationship. That's really what that is. You're finding it's almost like we are in this paternalistic relationship with our government. That's a toxic narcissist. The government thinks it can do no wrong, and truly it wants to get all it can out of you. It's gonna suck up all your money, all your resources, all your time, all your attention, and like you said, it's giving you something back, but at the costs, I think the costs are too much, and I don't think it's giving you enough.
Yeah, sorry about that.
But yeah, no, I totally agree that, the people that are the biggest issues when it comes to crossing the boundaries on certain values shouldn't be the ones that are put in charge to be, enforce those values. And then I talk about it in that video as well, where it's like the government is its own judge. Is like, we think about these things as like, a good example is even the emergency services, or the Emergencies Act commission recently that checked into whether it was justified to use the government.
I thought it was the most unjustified thing I've ever heard in my life. I saw those protests. It wasn't an inkling of violence. The word violence has now... This is a huge thing, and this is where I think Orwell actually does touch on a good thing. The way that the meaning of words is lost.
Yeah.
AKA, now we say things that words are violence. Now, quite frankly, words can be harmful. They can be destructive even, I think. But violent, no. Violent, if you Google the definition, implies like a physical injury or an assault on the person. Because that truly is like one of the highest like crimes you can do against someone is assault a person, to commit violence on them. But now we have changed the nature of language to fit within whatever the power deems. whatever the institutions deem as violent, you know. And again, it always is. They're always going to push bills and this stuff through the oppressed people, and that's the most vulgar and disgusting part, because I have so much empathy and compassion for people who've been oppressed and for people who are minorities, but your government doesn't really care about you. They are using you as a means to garner control and power over the dominion of everybody, including you, my friend. And you are not at the mercy. You're going to be at the mercy, rather, of that new power that you've given them, like we talked about.
Yes, 100%. And that's the play. One of the videos that I did that went really well. It was just a short 1.5 minute reel kind of thing, but it was essentially how dictatorships, every single dictator, man, positioned themselves as a victim.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So like, even you look at Stalin. Stalin was said that, and Lenin, the revolutionaries behind the USSR. They claimed that they were that the Russian people were victims of a capitalist conspiracy against them. So we need to do with communism, give us all the control, and we'll ward off the evil spirits, essentially the evil capitalists. Then in Nazi Germany, it was the Jews. It was we're victims of a Jewish conspiracy to hold us down economically. And all of these things, and then they position these powers, they scapegoat a certain group, and they say, yeah, we need all the power to deal with that group. And then, I mean, even, dude, going back to, circling right back to where we were talking about that nature for war and violence and all this stuff, we love to think that, like, democracy came about in this very, like, peaceful and loving way. It's like, no, the democracy killed about 40,000 people when it was being instituted. Yeah. The guillotine was invented to lop the heads off of people who were opposed to democracy. Yeah. So like which is literally so anti-democratic. It's like everybody gets their voice heard, but if your voice doesn't like what we have to say, we're gonna lop your head off in the public square. So it's like, looking at that, it's just all of this, it's the us versus them. It's the and it's just deeply rooted into our nature, and then to persecute those groups that we say are the oppressors.
What's dangerous too, and I take this back, and I want to bring this back to the individual level, is we as individuals, when we're being fed an identity of victim, and I know I have been in my own life, it's very attractive. I remember being in my women's studies class and learning about intersectionalism, and now there's some truth to it, but at the core of it, there's this idea that who I am as an individual, because of, let's say, my sexuality or my race and like my immigrant status, that I am a victim. And what it really does is it builds resentment. And I know this because I know myself, and I'm so fortunate to have gone through the experience of the victim mentality, because I can speak from personal experience and know it was the most bitter, resentful, and angry that I've ever been. Mm-hmm. That is exactly the psychic conditions in which I could have become the true oppressor, in which I could have become the arm of a tyrannical authoritarian state in that space, which is why I think it's so important us as individuals to move away from it. Not just because I think that moving away from a victim mentality empowers us, it allows us to find the ways in which we can show up to life. It not only improves our mental health, our spiritual health, all these things, but also because it prevents us from being an arm of an abusive authority who's only using us to propagate its own power. Mm-hmm. But it can only do that first if it can convince you of this mindset, of this victim mentality, which is, again, why, in part, I'm more scared of people who see themselves as victims than people who see themselves 100%. As an oppressor. I'm like, you're more dangerous. And in part why I never saw Trump as a huge worry, for me anyways, I go, he's so bombastic and out there. Even though he does have a bit of the victimization thing, it's a bit annoying. His faults are so on display. It's like, you know exactly what you're getting with the guy. He's just kind of a megalomaniac narcissist. Okay, he's self-serving.
It's the I'd rather the devil I know than the devil I don't.
And you will never know the devil you don't know under the politicians who are always under the guise of, I'm perfect and I'm doing this for everyone's all good. That I don't trust. Yeah. I trust people who are, not that I trusted Trump, but I trust people more who are openly flawed, both in the individual level. I love if I can talk to you and you can tell me your flaws, I go, I fuck with this guy.
Yeah.
If you sit here and you have trouble with it, what a lack of self-awareness, what a lack of knowing yourself. And it is in the lack of self-awareness that truly the psychic control of authoritarian governments and many other powers and ideas can behold in us, can take hold over us.
To that point, government is the only institution that is disincentivized from admitting it's wrong. So if a corporation puts a certain policy or practice into place and that starts yielding negative results, they need to change. They need to be aware of it and change course immediately, because they're going to bear the consequences of that not going as well. Like, okay, if I'm putting all this money into this thing and I want X result, but I don't get X result, I can't keep pouring money into that. Otherwise, my corporation's gone.
Right.
With government, if their policy isn't working, they have an incentive to not only not look at how they're wrong, but convince everybody that they're not wrong, because one, they're not paying the consequences. The taxpayers are. It's not their money. There will always be more taxes. And then two, if we're wrong, people lose their faith in our ability to be right. And so we can't possibly admit that we were wrong.
Because their greatest incentive is to maintain their political power.
Exactly.
I think that's it, right? Is as long as we live in a culture and a society in which you have for-profit motives, let's say in the corporate realm, aka always money first, that's when we move away from values and humanity, and why pharmaceutical companies and all these other companies are so willing to engage in malpractice, because they care about money first beyond your true well-being. And then secondly, on the political level, when you have politics that are incentivized for control and not for service, like I literally look at these politicians and I go, I don't think any of you want to serve people.
No.
I don't buy it at all. I think there's a handful of people in there who want to. There's an individual, Andrew Yang, who I believe in a little bit, because that guy, and he has a career track record in his personal life of, he became a successful entrepreneur. He created a foundation to help entrepreneurs. He created a fund to fund entrepreneurs. And then he looked at the States and his own country and said, I think I could also help this country. That to me,
Yeah.
I go, whoa, my God. And he's very much, he reminds me of he's kind of he went Democrat just because I think it made sense, but I think he's like not libertarian, but like, he's very much, if there was like a middle party,
He's a centrist,
independent.
yeah.
He's a centrist. And I love that, because I think that the centrist value comes from a true desire to serve others. It's like, I'm not here to impose my own values. I'm genuinely here to serve you. And how can I serve a country in which there is there is conservatism and there is liberalism, and these things are expressed not just in politics but in our personality traits, which I definitely recommend people take personality tests to understand yourself and your own proclivities, because it's extremely insightful. But in that regard, so how do you serve the most amount of people? Well, through a center, through the middle way. There's a reason why the Buddhist path is called the middle way.
Yeah.
There's a reason why ancient wisdom regards the middle as the best way.
Everything is balanced.
It's about a balance.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, on that note, is anything you want to share with people? Where can they find your videos? Where can they learn more about you?
Yeah.
What are you working on?
So I'm still just going to keep plugging away on YouTube videos. My next would be, I do want to write books in the future. And that's what I'm essentially looking at my social media as, is I am essentially farming an audience to sell books to.
I will read those books, my friend, and I
you.
will disseminate the insight into short form video content.
Amazing. Yeah, and honestly, that's what I look at right now, because I've had opportunities to kind of monetize my content or whatever, have certain ads placed in videos or whatever, and I'm just like, I don't care to do that right now. I do want to monetize it in the future, but
you dirty capitalist.
Yeah, but I want to do it on my terms.
Absolutely.
And you can find me on any platform, Liam Out Loud. There's different variations of it, but if you just search Liam Out Loud on any
Liam
platform,
Out
you'll find
Loud.
me. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. Honestly.
Yeah, no, this was great. I appreciate it.
I really appreciate it. Willingness. Yeah. Find Liam Out Loud. Really encourage people to, just, again, this is never about attacking anyone or taking anything away. It's that I fundamentally believe that I think you have your answers. I think deep within you, there is a connection to something, may I say, divine, if not a wisdom. But when you outsource that throughout your entire life to people in authority, to systems of governance, it disconnects you from not only yourself, but it gives people who might only have their own intentions at heart control and power over you. So just broadening our perspective and engaging in a new form of thinking that isn't so dogmatic and questions the narratives that we're given by people who, like Liam has clearly demonstrated, have incentives to have more control over you and to strip you of your individual freedom is something to be mindful of on this journey. Thank you for tuning in. I know your time is precious and I'm honored to share it with you. Please give the podcast 5 stars and follow us to stay updated. We look forward to seeing you here, now, next time for Where's the Nuance?